Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Schroyer, a career positioning strategist, professor, and someone who spent a lot of time thinking about what it really means to grow in a world that just won't stop changing. Welcome to the Technically Human podcast. This podcast is about navigating your career, your identity, and your next chapter in a world that's shaped by AI, technology, and constant change. Here, we're going to talk about real stuff. We're going to talk about career pivots, uncertainty, reinvention, and mostly how to stay grounded in who you are while everything around you evolves. Are you ready to go? Let's dive in. Welcome back, everyone, for another episode of Technically Human. I am joined by an awesome guest today, Simon Copsey. Welcome, Simon. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me, Tracy.
So I did a little bit of investigation research around Simon and what he's all about, but I don't think I would do it any justice to do an intro for you. So Simon, do you want to share just a bit around your background and what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure, Tracy. I started my life as a software engineer, but got more interested in what was happening behind the screen rather than on the screen. So how teams can organize themselves around problems and improve their approach. And then I slowly zoomed out and got interested in kind of departments, organizations as a whole, helping happier people deliver better software sooner.
When you talk about moving people in organizations from being firefighters to doctors, can you
Oh,
explain what you're talking about for each of those? I definitely know that I've experienced both of those in my corporate past, but do you want to explain what they are and why you're trying to shift people from the firefighter to the doctor?
oh, yes. Oh, wow. That's a really nice way of putting it as well. I don't think I use those as such eloquent words, Tracy. When we're firefighting, there's always something wrong with our business. There's also never enough capacity to get things done. We're always going to be firefighting. There's always going to be things that we need to deal with. But the common assumption is that every fire is of equal value, and that's not necessarily the case. So I think there's two things in this kind of shift that are important. One is that behind all the fires, there's a common cause. And if we work backwards, if we treat all the fires as effects of something deeper, like attrition doesn't happen on its own, slowing delivery doesn't happen on its own, all these things are effects. So if we look beyond the fire, the fuel, and focus there, there'll typically be less to deal with. But the second thing is prevention. Once we find the fuel behind the fire, we can start to move into a prevention mode and say, okay, if that's the thing that leads to the fires, let's tackle it now. And that's exactly what a doctor does. A doctor looks beyond the fire to the fuel. They look beyond the symptoms, the underlying cause. By focusing their efforts there, it's no longer just painkillers that will get you through the next day or two if you have back pain. It will actually fix your posture, for example. They'll be able to understand where the back pain's coming from. I talk about back pain a lot because I'm of that age. So yeah, understanding things that we generally attracted to as symptoms and that we can find a common underlying cause. And secondly, once we find the common underlying cause, we can move into prevention mode rather than firefighting. What comes up for you, Tracy? Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. What I think of when you talk about that too is thinking about what's the common cause and then also how to prevent those. Is
Mm,
that from my corporate experience, leaders or managers or senior executives, they act like they don't have time. It's just
mm.
fight the fire and do what you need to do. So, what are
Okay.
some of the ways when you work with organizations that you get them to have that revelation of, hey, if we find this common cause and we put steps to prevent this in the future, or we take a step back and look at this, it's actually going to help us later versus,
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think I have a brilliant answer yet, so I'm still learning here. The typical approach I take, there's a few things we can do, right? There's a few things. One is to wait till things reach a crisis point. It's not something I'd recommend as a consultant, but there's always the recognition that when things reach a crisis point, that's when people understand that there's more need to try things differently because your system's perfectly designed to get the results it gets, right? So there's that, but I wouldn't recommend that as a consultant. I think we want to get there and early. We don't want people to suffer, customers or staff. So the other approach I take is I draw a lot on the theory of constraints. And one of the tools in there in particular, once you've established what you're trying to optimize for, what are the kind of results you're looking, or the results that you're looking for, is to then work out what obstacles are taking you away from those results. Or fires, let's say, fires that are getting in the way of you getting to your results. And then if visually, this tool is very visual, you lay out the fires on a piece of paper and then you keep asking why. And slowly you see these, you get towards the underlying cause, and you'll see the causes start to like coalesce and compress to just a few areas to focus on. Once you've done that, and you can do that just through a few conversations, either as a consultant or a manager, the inherent simplicity behind the problems that they're facing comes out, and they see that actually tackling all these problems that we've got is really dead simple. And it's really easy once you have this visualization to talk through as if it's a story, because it's a causality diagram. You can say, let me tell you a story. So generally what we're seeing is this thing is happening over here. Because if that's happening here and that's happening there, these two things together are leading to this result here, and we don't want that result. And so you can
Right.
narrate it through. Ideally, by showing the system dynamics through just cause and effect diagrams, we can start to help people see the simplicity behind what otherwise is complex, where these fires coming from. And that in itself can give them perhaps the confidence to take action. But I admit I'm still learning. I'm still trying to find how we can help managers. Because there's one very important thing that you helped me realize behind your question, in that often it's the convincing of managers that's necessary. And the reason for that is a lot of the behaviors come from beliefs. The behaviors we see in management come from their beliefs about the world and about the business in which they're operating. And it's those beliefs that need to change before we can see any behavior change. And so a lot of consulting, a lot of management consulting transformation, whatever you want to call it, to have any effect is to try and tackle the assumptions held by management so they can change the rules, change the behaviors, and in doing so, help the staff succeed more readily. There was a very key underlying point in your question that I just wanted to highlight because it was great, Tracy.
Yeah, definitely. And when you talk about the beliefs,
Hmm.
how do you understand when you walk into an organization to support them? How do you have, and maybe it's intuition, I don't know, but how do you know if those senior leaders have the beliefs or have the ability to change what their beliefs are to go in
Hmm.
the direction that the organization needs to? Because I know there's definitely organizations you probably walked
Hmm.
into and it doesn't matter what I
Yeah.
do, this probably is not going to work. So what might that look like for you?
Yeah, that's good. I've definitely got it wrong before, I have to say. And given the clients a hot potato to deal with. So I've definitely got it wrong. I think a lot of it's, I guess, when the senior leaders invite you, that's when you know that there's more likelihood that they're willing to pull this kind of thing. But it's like with learning. Learning is something you can't put in someone's head. They have to take it and put it in their head themselves. And it's the same with this. They have to invite it in. There's another consultancy, a big consultancy in the UK called Vanguard Consulting, and I think one of their three rules of how they do business is they don't do marketing. They only do it when managers come to them because then they know they're ready. They'll be worried otherwise they're pushing these things. And then when it comes to tackling beliefs, they may not, it might just feel like bad news as opposed to a revelation.
So you talked about you failed before, lessons learned, right?
Yeah.
One of the things, and I can't remember exactly where I saw it, maybe it was in a couple places, you talked about being a failed manager.
Oh yeah.
I connected with that so much because I've been a people leader several times in my past from a corporate perspective. And like one instance, I asked to take a step out of leadership because I didn't feel like I was in the right place, right time, like all that kind of thing. Loved leading people, directing people, like helping people develop. Just wasn't the right thing for me. And then the second time ended up leading with my layoff and my team's layoff. And then I felt like I could have done something different. But when you talk about being a failed manager, can you give insight into what was that experience? What was that scenario? Why do you say that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate what you shared with me, Tracy. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is that when people are promoted into management, often it doesn't come with training, often it doesn't come with support. And so a lot of what we have to fall back on is mimicking other people or guessing. And the problem with management is that a lot of it doesn't give you any immediate feedback. If you're writing software, for example, you try to run it, and if it doesn't work, you know you're going the wrong way. Whereas you can't do that with management. The feedback loops could be months or years before you know whether you got in the way of someone growing or generating results. And so that's exactly what I did. I got in the way. I got in the way all the time. Being a parent as well as being a manager is about getting out of the way, as my friend likes to say. So I was micromanaging. I was like, okay, I've been promoted because I must be doing something right. So I just need to do more of what I did before. But in doing so, I tried to control. And when my team was struggling with something, some of it was very clear, right? I was just micromanaging. But some of it's more subtle than that. And this is where like Peter Senge talks about, you may know better than me, shifting the burden pattern where my staff maybe needed some help with something because they hadn't done it before. And we'd be under time pressure. So that would lead me to intervene and do it whilst they watch. But that just means that I take the learning away from them. And so next time round, what do we have to do? We have to do the same thing. And that's where you get burnout. The
Hmm.
managers, as their teams grow, if they either control their staff or get in the way by doing the work themselves, as their team grows, they'll just burn out. because their team can't learn. You're getting in their way. You're getting in the way of them achieving results, and most of all, you're getting in the way of their creativity and their joy of work. So that's how I fail to micromanage it. And I think that's unfortunately where we lose a lot of managers.
There's so many managers that they do really well at what they do as individual contributors, and they do get promoted. And then, like you said, there's minimal or no training at all. You're trying to mimic, you're trying to guess on what you need to do, and it goes terribly wrong for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I don't want other managers in the future to suffer from that because we have great people. We have great people who want to step into management.
Yeah. I want to step back a little bit. One of the things that you talked about when you're asking why and getting to that, the cause and effect,
Mm,
is you talk about the cholera effect. I think it was a developer live where you
mm,
had slides and you walked through the whole story.
mm.
But do you want to give insight into that story and how that connects to management and how we work?
I appreciate it, Tracy. Yeah, absolutely. I was really interested in cholera because it's mentioned in a number of books, I think particularly around systems thinking. I can't remember which one it was in particular, but it inspired me. And we had a wonderful hero in the Victorian times in London. His name was John Snow. We had several amazing heroes. Around the same time, we had Michael Faraday, we had Florence Nightingale. I didn't realize they're all alive in the same place at the same time, and it's quite incredible. But Jon Snow was on a particular mission at that time. It was believed that there were, I think, two prevalent theories about how germs spread cholera. I think the one I was looking at in particular in my talk was miasma theory, which is the idea that bad smell, if you inhale bad smell, you get ill.
Yep.
And so when they were dealing with cholera back then, those beliefs led to the behaviors that were knocking down buildings to increase airflow. They were closing tanneries and slaughterhouses because of the bad smells. And so the belief that bad smells spreads cholera led to the behaviors that knocking down buildings and things. And all this was ineffectual. What John Snow tried to do is he realized that incorrect belief was leading to incorrect behavior. He had another belief, which is that cholera was spread by contaminated water. And he came to this in several different ways through correlation and causation. He did these amazing things. He was the father of epidemiology. But the struggle he had was trying to convince other people. And I think it was only after he died at the age of 40 between cholera epidemics in London that people started to believe him. And as they started to adopt that belief, only then did their behaviors change. And did they realize that they just needed to boil water before drinking it, that the solution was so much simpler. And so the reason that really stood out to me is it's similar in management that often the common beliefs that we hold as managers that we mimic from other people, that we inherit from other people around us, because it's all we know how to do when we don't receive training or otherwise, often lead to behaviors that don't feel quite right or don't generate the results that you're looking for. And it's only when we change our beliefs and realize that they could be invalid that we can actually start to get to where we want to be and help ourselves, our staff, and organization to the results that they're looking for. So yeah, it was all trying to go back to change behaviors. We need to change beliefs as managers, and once we change those beliefs, we can actually generate the results. I think ACOP puts it really well. Sorry, and then I'll stop. ACOP is really says the main obstacle to an organization being where it most wants to be lies in the minds of its managers, which I thought
Ooh,
was just beautiful.
yeah, yes, that's very good. When you are working with organizations or you're reading, you're researching, what are some of those common beliefs you're finding that managers have that need to be worked on?
One of them is one of the ones that I use all the time and that we see very often as commonplace, I think, is if you keep everyone busy all the time, we'll deliver more in any given period. It's the efficiency syndrome, fully utilize everyone. It's not as a bad assumption, it's just an assumption that comes from that worked before we had the information we do have today to make better decisions. Now we have greater visibility and information all around us in organizations. We don't have to default to keeping everyone busy. So yeah, that's one. The reason for that is that leads to Kingsman's formula, it leads to queue lengths growing to infinity, it leads to us actually slowing things down, context switching, people not having time to learn, attrition, all those kind of things. So it doesn't actually take us to where we want to be, even though at face value it looks like it will. Another one is a common belief that we can motivate people, which we can't. We can create the conditions for motivation, as Daniel Pink reminds us, as Alfie Kohn reminds us, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, but we can't motivate people. The idea of, as Alfie Kohn also reminds us of, extrinsic motivators, carrots and sticks, don't work with kids, don't work with staff. Intrinsic motivation is the way to go. It will show short term, but very short term results. And then after that, unless it's a very particular type of work, won't work with knowledge work. Oh, and then, yeah, if we're talking about knowledge work, the adding more people to a project to move it faster, as we know, doesn't work with knowledge work. Maybe it works with non-knowledge work and manual labor, but not with knowledge work, as we know from the Mythical Man Month. Some more subtle ones I'm trying to think of. I didn't realize that often we believe that if there isn't a goal, it's not a bad thing, that a goal will naturally emerge from the organization. But without a goal, there's no way of, if you don't have a goal, then everything's of equal priority. And if we believe that an organization truly doesn't have infinite resources, which no organization does, then there's no way of focusing because we don't have a goal. There's no right, and therefore we can't choose what's wrong, what we should be doing. So we can't focus. So without a goal, we lose our focus. Without our focus, everything becomes of equal importance. With everything of equal importance, we generally say yes more than we say no. We have a high working process, multiple things at once. Everyone's context switching, delivery slows down. People don't have time to learn. People leave, go elsewhere. I didn't realize how sinister that was until I saw it. I'm sure there's many more, but I've gone on for a long time, Tracy. What about yourself?
Oh, those are really good. One of the things that I was thinking about, and I don't know if this is happening as
Yeah.
much where you are in the world as it is in the United States, but return to office. Their post-pandemic
Mm,
world, a lot of organizations have this, or leaders say they have this belief, and there's a lot of controversy over whether that's right or not, but the leaders are thinking you'll better communicate, you'll
mm,
better collaborate if you are in
mm,
person, if you're together. And a lot of workers are saying, hey, we did fine. We were just productive as we could be, probably even more efficient outside of the office,
mm.
and thinking about how that's impacting organizations. So I don't know if you're seeing any of that where you are.
Yeah, we are. This might be a weird digression. So I just watched a YouTube clip with James Cameron explaining he's just releasing a new Avatar movie, and because it's fully immersive, it's digital. There's so many options about where to place the camera. Is it up high, down low? And someone asked him, "How did you decide?" And what he said is something like, "I ask why. What is this scene? What part of the story is the scene trying to progress?" And I was just like, "That's amazing." And so when I see things like return to work policies, I'm like, what are we aiming to progress with this change in policy? And often it can't be answered because the decision's been made elsewhere. But often I assume it's either the general idea of productivity, but then it can't be defined what that means, or it's because of cost accounting, maybe, where they say we've got an office. If we don't spread the cost of the benefits across the cost of over a large number of staff, then it looks like a much bigger expense. But there are genuine reasons why moving back to the office is not a bad thing, but I don't see the why explained so much, and therefore either the reasoning hasn't been thought through, or it's been thought through and not explained, and that feels like it's quite disenchanting for staff, perhaps. But that's my limited take on it. What's your take on
I feel like I'm a conspiracy theorist when it comes to
it?
me. I think it's like a tax thing. It's like they're being taxed on these
Mm.
buildings, so it's like you better
Absolutely.
get your people in them to show that you're
Yeah.
using it. I just know as an employee who was remote work when I was in corporate and only had to go in the office 1 or 2 days a week, that kind of thing. It was very nice, and I felt like I did a lot better than if I would have had to be there all the time.
Yeah.
So definitely conspiracy, I feel around there.
No,
Put my
no, that doesn't feel
tinfoil
like
hat on.
conspiracy.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
that feels like a fair hypothesis. Yeah,
yeah.
that feels very fair.
So when you talk about asking why, and you
Mm,
said that earlier, and I know that, and I can't remember if it was like agile development or quality training or whatnot, and we learned like the five whys. I think Six
yeah.
Sigma, we talked about the five whys. When a team, or whether it's a leadership team or a project team, is going through and you're talking about, think of here's all the fires we have, why, and
Mhm.
asking these whys. Where does that fit into, or does it fit into a structure a team might already have, if this makes sense? Like, I don't know if for a team this would feel like out of the blue, or if
Mhm.
it's something that they should put into a regular routine meeting. I know from technology there were a lot of different ceremonies that people went through, but are you seeing that this is
Mhm.
something that people should go through on a regular basis, or it's only when certain things come up that they should, hey, let's have a huddle, let's talk about this?
That's a very deep question, Tracy. I love it. One of the assumptions, sorry, just as you're explaining that I missed before, is that people are good. We can always talk about that later, but that's probably the most key assumption in all this. But it is relates a little bit to this as I brought up. So I think ideally it's a pervasive thing. It's not a tool to be used. Ideally, it's just a mode of thought that anyone can switch to. And the reason I say that is, as I understand it, the way that we're taught primarily is an analytical approach where We're taught to break problems down into smaller pieces and then solve the individual pieces. We take a toy apart as a child, we understand the pieces, we put it back together. But in doing that, we often lose the ability to understand how the parts interact. And so in organizations, we often do that. As the organization grows, we break it into smaller pieces. We assign a manager to each piece. We optimize each piece. But in doing so, we fail to recognize how the pieces interact, the interdependencies, and we also recognize that improving all the pieces at once is just a waste of time and money and effort. When actually, generally, there'll only be a few pieces we need to improve at any one time. I don't need to get well from the flu. I don't need to improve my whole body. That'd be amazing. But I just need to improve
Right.
a few little bits. Ideally, what we want to encourage, and this is just a pervasive way of thinking, is people to move from an analytical mode of thought where they look at pieces and understand the pieces in isolation to synthesis mode of thinking, where we look at how the parts interact. We zoom out before we zoom in. And then by understanding the interactions, we can work out where to focus. And that's all this is, really. And ideally, that should be pervasive so we can. Analytical thinking works when there aren't interdependencies, but that's generally an edge case. In the real world, everything is connected and karma. It's in all kind of Eastern and Western philosophies, the butterfly effect. So that's where synthesis or systems thinking is very helpful because it helps us understand how things link together first. So we know where to focus before we focus on everything. And the way of doing that, simple way, is cause and effect thinking, saying, okay, we see these things, where is it coming from, working backwards, and then we can see how things affect each other. So my long-winded way of saying I don't think it needs to be a ceremony or anything like that. What I would love is for managers, as everyone to be more grounded in systems thinking. It's dead simple. It's even easier than an analytical approach. It's just that the steps are just the opposite of what we do for an analytical approach. And we do it naturally as part of design. Because that way, when we're solving any kind of problem, we can say, how do we want to solve this? As opposed to it being an event. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Thank you. So one other question I have that I thought of was, and even as I was preparing, I was thinking about my own experience in corporate and how we had several different coaches, consultants, firms come in and try to support us, whether it was hard skill development, soft skill development, like whatever that was. And it felt like whenever that happened, that coach, consultant firm would be there for about a set period of time. We would go through the process, the training, like whatever it was, we would start to integrate it into our culture. And then the minute, maybe not the minute, maybe a couple days, a couple weeks later, that really died off. And it no longer stayed terminology, it no longer stayed process, it no longer stayed the thinking within the organization. And I'm just wondering when you go in and talk to organizations, are there ways that organizations can look to instill these things that you're teaching them so it happens on a regular basis, even when you're not there later? And maybe some of it has to do with what's the impact, what's the ROI for them and for the business and things like that. But any thoughts on how to get it to stick a little bit more?
That's interesting. Because I had to speculate on my part a little bit. And one of the speculations I have in one possible reason for that is perhaps that not all change is improvement, and maybe that wasn't the right change if it's not being taken. Because I think often maybe try to extend that speculation. This is all speculation. It's just science guessing. Is often managers from the Tayloristic days of manufacturing. We separate the why and the how. Management kind of understand the why, but they don't understand the how, and the staff understand the how, but not the why. And
Hmm.
just not because they're stupid or anything, not at all. It's just often the
Right.
communication structures and the managers aren't as close to the workers because they're so busy, and the staff don't have. It's not communicated necessarily why we're doing what we're doing. And if we separate those two things, then any change is maybe more likely to fail. Or often maybe the managers choose the change or the consultancy, the solutions without understanding the how, and the staff don't understand the why. So yeah, sorry, you're making me think. You can see me, my eyes glazing over as I think more deeply. I think it's that separation maybe hurts things, and that's why I quite like these thinking tools because it brings management closer to the problem, to understanding it, doing the diagnosis first, visually looking at this cause and effect diagram and going, all the problems I can see up here, which are really visible and things I really care about as a manager, if I trace them down with my staff, with their understanding of the world that's complex and no one can see the whole but we have a better chance if we put all our pieces together. Now I can see, where it's coming from. I couldn't see that before. And the staff can understand, oh, geez, that this thing down here is really important to solve, not just for these reasons that I can see, but for those reasons up there. And then as you walk through, you move to some other tools, but it allows you again to construct these solutions, thinking about both the why and the how. So my speculation is if the change was rejected, it was probably not an improvement. What maybe encouraged it not to be an improvement is the separation of the why and how, the staff and the management, maybe. But tell me, what do you think, Tracy? You're in the
I
situation.
Yeah, my head was, I thought of immediately an example, and I love the distinction between the managers having the why in that context and the staff knowing
Mm,
the how and what the process looks
mm,
like. Because I can think of an example back when
mm,
senior executives said, "Hey, we're going to do this thing and we're going to do it in 2 months." And then
mm,
they come to and I
mm,
was over the learning for our tech team, and they come to the tech team and they said, "Hey, we promised this guy over here, this
mm,
partner, that we're going to do this in 2 months."
mm,
And this whole team is, "What the hell?
mm,
Like, there is
mm,
no way this is going to happen." And senior
mm,
leadership was like, "Figure out, get it done." And it was like, why do we need to do it in 2 months? So, like you said, if there was more communication, more discussion, more context, yes,
mm,
it helped the company to look better that we had that in place 2 months, probably before other competitors. But if the executives would understand a little bit more around, they don't need to know the minute details of how it was going to be done. But if they just had even a time frame, something like that, ask the question first before making the promise, I think there would have been a little bit better internal dialogue and morale.
yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. There's one of the tools in the theory of constraints is a goal tree, which says this is what we're optimizing for. In order to do that, these are the things we need. In order to have those things, these are the things we need. And so slowly you have the strategy at the top, and then it starts to go towards the tactics, which is where that the how, where staff can tell us where we're wrong. And so that's a really nice way of gelling the strategy and the tactics. And the other thing that you could do is flip it around and use kind of project into the future and almost simulate the future in advance and say, okay, so if we did this thing here, knowing the current situation is this, what do we think might happen? And what are the negative things that could happen? And so that's where another way of bringing everyone together, the whys, the hows. So together you can work out is there another way of doing this? We could say we'll do this by this date, but there might be other, if we know what the goal is, there might be different things we can do, or different dates, or different bits that we could do. We can start to plan the injections or the kind of the steps together as a team. But if we don't talk about what the why is, what the goal is, what we're optimizing for in the very first place, and just say, here's the solution, do it by then, there's very little, there's only, every solution has one solution, but every problem has multiple solutions. And we can share the problem, the kind of the goal with the team, then they go,
Yes.
oh, that sounds hard, but that sounds fun.
And how many more different ideas would you have, potential solutions, if you had
Yeah,
that conversation
mm,
versus just, hey, this is the exact thing that we need to do? Because you
yeah,
might get to the same end goal solving that problem, but there's a million different ways to get there, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what's lovely about problems. That's there's so many different options. Absolutely.
Simon, is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't covered?
Oh, geez, Tracy, your questions are so good. I think we covered. Yeah, yeah, those are. I think we
Great
covered so much
conversation.
together. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Anything else? Oh, another assumption came up for me actually, which is it was the people who are good. And the reason that that's so important, the reason that I highlighted that one earlier was fundamental, sort of fundamental attribution bias. I find that's particularly, I think that feels quite important to me is if I understand what that is correctly, which is the tendency when other people don't behave as expected to say it's due to their personality, it's due to them. Whereas when you don't behave as expected, it's because, oh, it's just luck was against you. So you kind of have these two reasons, and it's very generous to yourself. And that's very difficult because if you start to believe that, when you start to diagnose problems in an organization, you start to blame staff. And as my friend Marco says, if you blame staff, that's it. You can't change that. But if you really believe people are good, you'll look beyond it. You'll be soft on people, hard on the system. You'll understand what are the conditions in this organization that led to the staff behaving the way they did. And that's where you can learn and make things better. Whereas if you just say, ah, staff are bad, fundamental attribution bias or error, I can't remember the term, then okay, we might as well accept you can't improve the situation. That's why people are good. If you accept people are good, you'll stop, as Ellie Goldratt says, forgive me, bitching and moaning about the staff, and you'll say, hang on a second, people do things for a reason. People are rational. What is
Mhm.
it that we've done as managers? What rules have we set? What conditions have we created that encourage them to behave that way? Because everyone does the best they can. We hire them after all. And therefore, what are the levers for change? So with next time round, we get a more of a beneficial result. So yeah, people are good. If we believe people are good, we'll look beyond, we'll won't blame staff, we'll understand how we can make the organization better by changing the conditions as managers. If that makes sense.
I like that. Yeah, definitely
That
all
was
comes
a week.
down to the beliefs and leading the behaviors from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Simon. I appreciate your time. I do want to ask if somebody wants to get in connection with you or follow you, or if you have additional resources, where would you recommend that they do that?
Oh, that's a lovely question, Tracy. Thank you. I'm on LinkedIn, but also have curiouscoffee.club where there's articles and videos and a free book for anyone who wants to understand how to help an organization get out of its own way.
Yeah. I don't know if you're posting your blog on your LinkedIn, but I saw your firefighter, or not your firefighter, it was the toilet seat, putting the toilet seat down was your most recent LinkedIn. And I was like,
Thank you
it
for
just
that.
intrigues you to look, and then you're going to read further, and then you go, oh, aha, that does make sense. I totally get that connection. So I like the way that you tell the story. Yeah,
Thank you very much. I'm glad it stayed with you, Tracy. That means a lot.
definitely, definitely. Thank you again, Simon. And we will see everyone on the next episode. Thank you. Thanks again for listening to the Technically Human podcast. If you are navigating a career shift or you're just feeling like something needs to change, remember you do not have to figure it out alone. Learn more at www.careercompossusa.com. And if this episode helped you in any way, sharing it with someone else might help them too. I'll see you in the next episode.